Right now, there are approximately 15,000 brand new completed condos sitting vacant in the Greater Toronto Area. At the same time, the companies that are supposed to be constructing more housing in that same city are going bankrupt faster than at any point in the last 30 years. Consider what that actually means for a moment. You have a housing crisis, you have empty units, and the people tasked with increasing supply to that market are filing for insolvency at an unprecedented pace. That is not a real estate correction. That is something much stranger and, frankly, far more serious. CAIRP, the Canadian Association of Insolvency and Restructuring Professionals, confirmed that 1,247 construction companies across the Greater Toronto Area went insolvent in 2025 alone. That's 43% higher than the previous year. And with Q1 2026 projections already looking strong, we're on track for roughly 1,559 total by the end of 2026. 1,559 companies. I want that number to register before moving on. That's not 15. That's not 150. That is 1,559 construction firms in one metropolitan area gone in roughly 18 months. And here's the question I kept returning to when I first started investigating this. How does that happen in a city with a documented housing shortage? How does the industry responsible for building more housing collapse at this scale? The answer is both simpler and more damaging than I expected. And it has a name: the fixed-price contract. That is where this all begins. And once you understand the mechanism, everything else in this discussion, the skeleton buildings, the families with frozen deposits, the subcontractors who cannot get paid, all of it makes sense. Everything flows from this one factor. So, let's go there. Here's the situation, and I want to explain it before throwing any numbers at you, because the numbers are only meaningful once the picture is clear. Imagine you own a restaurant. In early 2022, a client walks in and says, "I want to book you for a large event, maybe 200 guests next year." You put together a quote. You calculate the cost of ingredients, your staff, and the space. You arrive at a number. They sign the contract. Prices are locked in. Fast forward 2 years. The cost of everything needed to run that event, food, labor, logistics, energy, has risen roughly 50%. Not a little, not minor inflation rounding, 50%. And the contract says what it says. You're delivering the event at the price quoted 2 years ago. Every plate you serve now costs more than you make. You can't renegotiate. You can't walk away. You complete the event and absorb the loss. That is exactly what happened to builders across the GTA at massive scale. They signed fixed-price construction contracts in 2022 to 2023. Locked in at an average of about $220 per square foot. According to StatCan Construction Price Index data, by early 2026, the actual construction cost index had risen to $332 per square foot. That's a 51% increase. 51%. Not a rounding error. Not something absorbable through efficiency gains. A 51% jump in the cost to build, while revenue remained fixed at 2022 prices. And this wasn't caused by a single factor. Lumber, the framing material that supports the building while everything else is installed, jumped 62%. That alone would have been painful. But at the same time, steel, labor, and diesel, which power every crane and delivery truck on every active site, rose roughly 40%, while revenue remained frozen at 2022 levels. And here's the cost often overlooked: financing. Builders borrow money to construct. Every extra month a project runs in a high-interest environment costs real money. interest that wasn't included in the original pro forma. That alone added roughly another 50% to the cost of carrying a 2022 project budget into 2026. All of these pressures hit at once on contracts with no adjustment clause. Take one real example, an Eglanton corridor condo project, 200 units. The builder signed a contract worth $88 million. Based on 2022 cost estimates, the margin was workable. Not huge, but the math made sense. By Q1 2026, running the same construction activities at 2026 costs produced a real bill exceeding $132 million. The revenue was still $88 million. The working capital lasted about 14 months. Then the builder filed for insolvency. Now take that one project and multiply it by 1,559 companies. Altus Group estimates the total construction cost overruns locked into GTA projects that failed or stalled at roughly $44.8 billion. $44.8 billion. Installed projects and canceled buildings across a single metropolitan area. I've driven past some of these, and you probably have too. The crane is still there. The concrete structure rises 5 or 10 floors, and then stops. No workers, no signage, just a skeleton. You drive by and think, what happened there? Now you know. One thing I've found useful when tracking all the equity implications is the Housing Survivor Guide in the pinned comment. It covers 7 specific factors quietly compressing property values in this market. It took me a while to put together. The link is in the description. Builders are the headline, but they're not the whole story. When a construction company goes insolvent, most people immediately think of the project, the building, or the buyers. And those matter. We'll get there. But another group often gets completely buried in the aggregate numbers. The subcontractors, plumbers, electricians, framers, drywallers, the people doing the physical work on every site across the GTA, who signed their own contracts with the builder, showed up, did the work, and submitted invoices. Standard practice in construction is roughly 40% upfront, with the remaining 60% paid at specific project milestones. When the builder files for insolvency, that remaining 60% gets frozen and becomes part of the receivership estate. If you've never dealt with a receivership, that means your money is now tied up in a legal process that can take 2 to 3 years to resolve. At the end of that process, according to CAIRP analysis of unsecured creditor recoveries, the average trade contractor receives about 14 cents on the dollar. I'll just say that plainly. You did the work. You invoiced it. The builder ran out of money due to a cost environment that may have been outside anyone's direct control. You file a lien under the Ontario Construction Act, the legal mechanism you're entitled to with a 45-day window. You wait for the court process, and 28 months later, you recover 14% of what you were owed. That's not a legal protection. That's a waiting room with a poor payout at the end. CAIRP tracked roughly 3,872 subcontractors across the GTA directly caught in builder insolvencies, with total unpaid balances around $2.73 billion. Based on what the lien and receivership process actually delivers to unsecured creditors, most of that money doesn't come back. That number isn't a rounding error. That is the overwhelming majority of $2.73 billion. And it doesn't land all at once. It moves through the project in sequence. The trades doing the heavy structural work hit first. Within a couple of months of a filing, their cash flow is gone. They don't wait around. By the time the later trades reach their own wall, the plumbers, finishers, and early crews are already making different business decisions. Some have already closed. That's the wave. different timing, same destination. In the Eglinton West cluster alone, across 28 cancelled projects, there were 147 subcontractors with unpaid balances totaling about $12.4 million. Around 68% of them, according to follow-up CAIRP data, ceased operations within 90 days of the builder filings. That plumbing company your builder was using, that electrical crew, that small framing outfit running for a decade with most revenue tied to 2 or 3 main contractors. All of them were swept up. They stop. At the full GTA scale, CAIRP estimates 106,000 total job impacts when you include multiplier effects across suppliers, materials, logistics, and indirect employment. The GDP hit has been estimated at roughly $18 billion. That is not just a construction industry problem. At that scale, it's a regional employment problem. If you're in the trades and have experienced this, a builder insolvency, frozen payments, the lien process, I want to hear what actually happened in your situation. Leave it in the comments, because aggregate numbers are one thing. What it feels like to watch 60% of your invoice disappear into a legal process is something else entirely. Now, here's where it gets personal, not abstract. Between 2022 and 2025, roughly 68,000 people in the GTA bought pre-construction condos. Not to speculate, not to flip them. Most bought because pre-construction was the affordable entry point or the most accessible option. You commit early, put down your deposit, wait for completion, and get the keys to a home you planned for. The plan made sense when they signed it. The average deposit in this market was around $240,000. Years of savings for most families. The financial bridge to ownership. Now, across the GTA, 8,023 units are either cancelled outright or sitting without occupancy certificates, no completion date, and no real clarity. 32 projects fully cancelled, 6,981 units gone. 4 more major projects stalled in Q1 2025 alone, adding over 1,000 more. 6,800 families, $240,000 average deposit. You do the math. I have a friend, well, someone I know through a mutual connection, who bought pre-construction in 2023. They have a young child, needed more space than their rental, and this was their plan. They put down $210,000 and are still paying rent on their current apartment. The project has been in receivership for 8 months. The last communication they received from the receiver was a notice that the legal timeline for resolving the claims could take up to 26 months. So, they're paying rent every month, while $210,000 sits in a legal process they have no control over. Their mortgage pre-approval is on hold for an apartment that doesn't have an occupancy certificate and may never get one. Each passing month adds rent on top of the financial cost of a deposit they cannot yet recover. They didn't act recklessly. They didn't speculate. They bought what was widely presented as a responsible, accessible path to home ownership. And now, through no fault of their own, they are in one of the worst financial positions of their lives. Terrarian Corporation, Ontario's new home warranty program, the mechanism specifically designed to protect buyers in these situations, received 2,156 warranty claims related to stalled and cancelled projects in 2025. They denied 69% of them, most frequently citing that the cost escalation triggering the builder insolvency wasn't covered under the warranty terms. Let that sink in. The safety net meant to protect buyers doesn't apply to the type of situation that occurred. The warranty fund processed $780 million in claims and now has a 26-month backlog. 31,960 families are either denied or still waiting. The financial exposure for households caught in stalled projects is enormous. Average deposits of $240,000. For buyers with mortgage approvals pending on uncompleted projects, you must layer in carrying costs of waiting. Some families in the Eglinton and Scarborough clusters face combined exposure, deposits plus rent over an 18-month delay, exceeding $1 million per household. And the Bank of Canada stress test qualifying rate at 5.25% has blocked most of these stranded buyers from refinancing their way out. You can't sell something that isn't built. You can't refinance. The qualifying rate prevents restructuring. You're stuck. Key terms to understand here: negative equity, receivership, occupancy certificates, class action proceedings in the Ontario Superior Court. Consumer insolvencies tracked by CAIRP are up 2.3% overall, and 18% of those cases involve unfinished condo deposit situations. If you're dealing with any version of this, or close to someone who is, the guide in the pinned comment covers the equity side mechanics that tend to compound quickly when a market position goes sideways. Not theory, the actual levers. Link is in the description. Here's where this stops being about what already happened and starts being about what's already decided. Housing starts in the GTA dropped 79% in Q1 2025, according to CMHC, the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. And I want to be precise, 79% is not a rounded figure for emphasis. That is the quarterly decline from roughly 12,500 units per month at the prior baseline to 2,600 units, the lowest level since 1987. A 30-year low. Toronto downtown and the Eglinton corridor specifically fell 87% and 89%. Mississauga and Brampton down 83%. Scarborough and Vaughan down 86%. Now here's the thing I keep running into when discussing this with people: the confusion. About 23,000 units are currently blocked in the GTA. 15,000 of those are completed condos sitting unsold. Another 8,000 plus are the skeleton buildings we already discussed. And yet, the GTA rental vacancy rate is under 1%, with rents up 18% year over year, according to SQM research tracking. By any standard measure, there is a housing shortage and 15,000 finished empty units. At the same time, this is genuinely not a supply problem. It is a pricing problem in a supply costume. Those units were priced for investors expecting appreciation that never came. They were not priced for families who actually need to live somewhere at the income levels that exist in the city. The supply exists. It's just the wrong supply at the wrong price for the actual demand. People cannot find housing, and buildings sit empty. Both things are true simultaneously. That is where we are. Now, here's why this matters beyond the immediate moment. Altus Group, which does detailed completions forecasting for Canadian residential construction, projects that 2025 will be a record year for completions, roughly 31,400 units. Altus Group's data is clear, and if you only look at that number, you might think, okay, supply is coming through. Things are stabilizing. That is the trap. Those 31,400 units are the last gasp of contracts signed in 2022 when the market was entirely different, the pipeline finishing out. What comes after is where I had to pause and sit with the numbers, because the trajectory is stark. Completions in 2026 are cut nearly in half. 2027 is cut in half again. In 2028, the GTA completes under 10,000 units for the entire year. In a metro area of millions, with a vacancy rate under 1%. Under 10,000 units for the whole year. The 2028 number is not a forecast that might be revised upward if conditions improve. The buildings that would need to break ground right now to complete in 2028 are not breaking ground. That part is already done. We're just waiting for it to arrive. With 1,559 builder insolvencies, you've lost the productive capacity to build roughly 85,000 units per year, based on CAIRP estimates of what those companies collectively delivered. You're not rebuilding that kind of industry capacity in 2 years. You're not rebuilding it in 3. That takes time the supply deficit simply doesn't have. Toronto Life reported in early 2026 that the industry was warning of 100,000 jobs at risk across the GTA's construction sector, 41,000 direct builder positions, and roughly 59,000 in the supply chain, trucking, and materials. Lendworth Financial reported similar numbers in September 2025. Stories.com called it a structural collapse in residential construction. On the supply chain side, the inputs you actually need to build, the pressure compounds the starts problem rather than easing it. Ontario's lumber mills have been running well below prior capacity since builder cancellations dried up order volume. Steel and rebar costs climbed on the import side. StatCan data shows the trade environment pushed rebar far beyond what normal escalation would explain. Thousands of heavy truckers in the GTA are sitting idle, not because there's no work in the region, but because the sites that need them aren't active. The labor situation is the one BuildForce Canada has been clearest about. The skilled trades pipeline is bringing in roughly half of what the construction sector needs. And when the sites aren't running, those workers move on or don't come. You don't rebuild that roster in a year. So the inputs are broken, the builders are broken, and the projected output for 2028 is under 10,000 units per year in a market that needs multiples of that. That is the gap between the headline and the reality. And here's the part that doesn't get covered nearly enough. There are a few things buried in this story that take a minute to set up properly. This section is, in my view, the most important for understanding what's happening underneath the surface data. The first is something CAIRP flagged in their analysis called PANICS activity. When a construction company goes insolvent, the legal entity enters receivership. Debts are frozen inside that entity. Assets go through the court distribution process. Creditors wait. But the people who ran that company, the directors, can open a new company under a different name, a different entity, same people. The mechanism they use is called the OSB Safe Harbor Provision, a legitimate legal process designed to allow failed businesses to restructure and try again. CAIRP found that roughly 37% of the insolvent GTA builder companies, around 578 cases, showed evidence of PANICS activity, with companies collapsing debt through insolvency and then reconstituting under a new entity sometimes within months. 589 safe harbor applications were processed in 2025, with a 91% approval rate. In practice, this means approximately $1.91 billion in creditor obligations, money owed to subcontractors, suppliers, and the CRA was effectively bypassed through this process. One builder in the Scarborough area has apparently done this 4 times since 2023 and continues winning contracts. A clean record every time. No outstanding obligations. Practically a new company, which technically it is. I don't know how to describe how strange that is. The subcontractor who filed their lien waited 28 months and recovered 14%. They may have been owed money by a company that had already reconstituted and started fresh before the court process even resolved. That's not a loophole being exploited. That's the system working exactly as written, just producing outcomes that feel fundamentally wrong. Have you or anyone you know bought from a builder that turned out to be a renamed version of a company that had previously failed? I'm serious. Leave it in the comments, because this happens more than anyone openly discusses. There's also the U.S. steel tariff impact worth noting. StatCan import data shows GTA rebar and structural steel costs rose 67% above the pre-tariff baseline, driven by a combination of import conditions and supply chain disruptions, accounting for a secondary trigger factor in roughly 654 insolvency cases on top of the core fixed price escalation. Strata corporations, the legal entities that manage condo buildings on behalf of unit owners, face their own crisis. The Condominium Authority of Ontario has identified 1,923 strata corporations in the GTA with sinking fund deficits. A sinking fund is what a building uses to pay for major repairs: roof, HVAC, structural work. The combined deficit across those buildings sits at roughly $2.88 billion. Special levies, the additional fees charged to unit owners when the fund runs short, have nearly doubled in some buildings over recent years. This is worth stating clearly. If you already own a condo in the GTA, this could directly affect you right now. Not as a future risk, but as something happening in buildings across the city, possibly including yours. Around 32% of the failed builder entities were backed by foreign capital, primarily Chinese, Indian, and Korean investors, according to Urban Nation's tracking data. As financial conditions shifted, funding was repatriated. Roughly $2.1 billion in committed project financing exited the market. About 4,100 units are now sitting in stalled buildings that were primarily financed by international capital that has since left. The immigration and labor side deserves one clear statement. IRCC, Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, is bringing in roughly 18,000 skilled construction workers per year. The industry says 35,000 are needed. The gap compounds every year the sector stays in this condition. I was talking to someone who manages a lumber yard near Scarborough. I had stopped in for a home project, and he mentioned almost offhandedly that they'd lost 5 major builder accounts in a single year. Not customers who switched to competitors, but customers who had ceased to exist. He said it completely matter-of-factly, as if it had become routine. That stuck with me. 5 companies gone in 1 year from a single yard's customer list. So where does this actually go? Based on combined projections from Altus Group, CMHC, and CAIRP, the most likely trajectory from here looks like this. Insolvencies continue running at elevated levels through 2026 and into 2027. Completions fall sharply each year through 2028, dropping below 10,000 units annually for the entire GTA against the provincial target of 50,000 units per year that Ontario has been working toward. The cumulative supply deficit against that target reaches roughly 523,000 units by 2029. To put that in perspective, CMHC has a 10-year homes target for Ontario of 1.5 million units. Based on where the construction pipeline actually sits, the realistic maximum delivery is closer to 850,000. That is not a worst-case scenario. That is what happens if nothing gets dramatically worse, and the sector just rebuilds at normal speed. The GTA rental vacancy rate, based on Rentals.ca projections, is expected to continue compressing from around 1.8% now toward 0.9% in 2026. Below 1% vacancy in a market this large means rent pressure doesn't ease. It means more households spending higher shares of income on housing. It means the feedback loop between housing costs and all other financial pressures on families keeps tightening. The one variable that could actually change this trajectory, and when I say one variable, I mean the single factor that could genuinely shift the projection curve, is the interest rate direction from the Bank of Canada. BOC rates affect developers' borrowing costs on new project financing on one side and buyers' qualifying ability on the other. If both move favorably at the same time, the economics of starting new projects and selling them shifts. If they don't, the math continues not to work, and the 2028 supply cliff arrives more or less as projected. Everything else in the forward picture is already largely locked. I spent several weeks deep in this data and want to share something that doesn't fit neatly into a data point. At some point during the research, I think when I was reviewing the Terrian denial numbers, the 69%, and then immediately seeing the Phoenix activity data afterward, I had a moment where I just closed the laptop and made a coffee. Not dramatically, just needed a minute. Because those two things together, a family waiting 26 months to see if they get any of their deposit back, and the directors of the company that took that deposit potentially already operating under a new name. That combination is genuinely hard to process. The system isn't broken in ways that are easy to fix. It is producing exactly the outcomes its rules allow, which is a different problem. I don't think useful analysis involves dressing that up. And I don't think catastrophizing beyond what the data shows is helpful either. What the data shows is that the current configuration, cost structure, builder capacity, starts level, completions, pipeline, is not producing enough supply for the population that exists in this market and needs somewhere to live. The 2028 supply cliff is not a forecast that might be wrong. The buildings that would need to start now to complete in 2028 aren't starting. That part is already written. Something adjusts. It always does. The question, the one I genuinely don't have a clean answer to, is who absorbs the cost of that adjustment and on what timeline. If you want to see the full picture of what this means for existing condo owners and investors specifically, we did a detailed breakdown of over 40,000 unsold pre-construction condos across the GTA using Q1 2026 data from Urbanation, CoreLogic, TRREB, and CMHC, showing $15 billion in equity losses hitting investors this year, and specifically, why so many of them are financially unable to sell even as those losses compound. That video is linked on screen now, and if you're working through what any of this means for your own position, owner, potential buyer, investor, the Housing Survivor Guide is in the pinned comment, 7 specific things eroding property value in this market right now. Not theory, the actual mechanics. It's free. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next.